When we talk about telehealth in 2025, most folks focus on the screens, the apps, the convenience. But if we're honest with ourselves, the real story isn't about technology at all. It's about people trying to hold their lives together in a world that moves too fast, demands too much, and offers too little room to breathe. It's about the quiet unraveling of mental health that too often goes unnoticed until something breaks. And it's about how, in moments of crisis, we reach for whatever tools we have, sometimes out of desperation, sometimes out of hope to reconnect the frayed edges of our own humanity. You start to realize that telehealth, for all its circuitry and code, is really just a long distance bridge between suffering and support, between confusion and clarity, between feeling alone and remembering that you're not. The question is, are we building that bridge wide enough, strong enough, and fair enough for everyone who needs to cross it? When the world shifted in the early 20s, not gradually, but all at once, we saw just how fragile our systems really were. Clinics shut down, commutes vanished, isolation became the norm. And in that sudden silence, anxiety and depression crept into more homes than we were prepared to admit. Health workers, policymakers, and communities had to improvise. They had to make choices fast, often with incomplete information, guided by little more than instinct and the stubborn belief that people still deserved care, even when the old ways of delivering it fell apart. State governments scrambled to expand reimbursement policies. Doctors learned to trade waiting rooms for webcams. Patients who had spent years wrestling with stigma suddenly found themselves talking to therapists from the safety of their living rooms. And as strange as that shift was, something remarkable happened. The outcomes weren't just comparable for many people, they were better. Telehealth became a lifeline for folks who had spent too long navigating long drives, long waits, or long standing fears of being judged. But even then, the promise wasn't equally shared. Some neighborhoods had the bandwidth literally to connect, others didn't. Some homes had privacy, others had thin walls and crowded rooms. And so the story of telehealth, like most stories in America, became a story of both progress and disparity, of innovation shadowed by inequity. I've seen some version of that tension my whole life. When I was organizing on the south side of Chicago, we didn't have fancy platforms or digital tools, but we had the same challenges. Reaching people who were doing their best in an environment that wasn't designed with them in mind. Later in the White House, I learned quickly that health reform was never just about policy. It was about trust. It was about whether a single mother believed the system would actually help her, or whether it was just another institution that would leave her waiting, or worse, leave her out. And I'll tell you, during moments like the early pandemic, when leaders were forced to weigh ethics against speed, innovation against privacy, it became clear that technology alone would never save us. What saved us were the nurses who checked in on their patients after long shifts, the mental health counselors who shifted entire caseloads online overnight, the policymakers who pushed for reimbursement parity because they understood that care shouldn't depend on a zip code, and the families who, through fear and uncertainty, kept showing up to those virtual appointments because they still believed healing was possible. Even now, when I watch communities embracing telehealth not as a gimmick, but as a genuine tool for dignity and well being, I'm reminded of something Michelle used to say: hope is not passive, it's something you have to work at. She was right. So, when we think about telehealth today and the supplements that support it, the tools that help people manage anxiety, depression, or chronic stress from home, we shouldn't view them as shortcuts. They're signposts in a larger moral landscape. They force us to ask what kind of society we want to be. Are we willing to use technology to include rather than exclude, to listen rather than surveil, to heal rather than merely optimize? Because every innovation carries a shadow. Digital care can widen divides as easily as it can close them. Privacy can erode just as quickly as access expands. And if leadership ignores those tensions, if we treat telehealth as a substitute for human connection rather than a support for it, we risk losing the very thing that makes healthcare meaningful: the belief that every life has equal worth. But if we get it right, if we match our technological ambition with ethical intention, if we remember that the strength of our democracy rests on the health and hope of every citizen's mind, then telehealth becomes more than a service. It becomes a testament to what we're still capable of when compassion guides our innovation. Progress is never perfect, it's never easy, but it is possible if we choose to make it so. And so here we are in 2025, standing at the edge of another chapter. Telehealth has grown from emergency response to everyday reality. Supplements and remote tools help millions manage their well-being in ways that once felt out of reach. But the responsibility remains ours to keep asking the hard questions, to keep widening the circle of care, to make sure that in our pursuit of efficiency, we don't lose sight of empathy. Because in the end, technology may connect us, but only our choices will define us. So we have to ask ourselves, what kind of care are we willing to fight for? Who do we choose to include in the future we're building? And what does it say about us if we leave anyone behind?